The morning of December 22nd began like any other in Brentwood, California. A crisp chill in the air, the faint hum of luxury cars along quiet streets, the soft glow of sunlight reflecting off sprawling estates. But for one family, the day would end in horror so unfathomable that it would shake Hollywood to its core. Rob Reiner, a man celebrated as an actor, director, and producer, and his wife Michelle, were found dead in their own home, victims of a violent, personal tragedy that no one could have anticipated. Their deaths weren't the result of some random crime, a burglar caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, or a misfortune born of fate. No, this horror came from inside their family, from someone they trusted more than anyone in the world. Their son, Nick, only 32, was arrested the very night of the murders, charged with first-degree murder in a case that would leave the world asking questions they might never want to hear the answers to. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine waking up to the news that your world, the one you thought was safe and familiar, was shattered. Imagine hearing that the people who raised you, who nurtured you, who promised you love and protection, were gone, and that the hands that committed the crime were the very hands meant to be trusted the most. How do you reconcile that? How do you process the unimaginable? For Romy Reiner, the Reiners' 27-year-old daughter, that nightmare became a reality. She was the one to discover her parents' lifeless bodies, a scene that would scar her forever and force her to confront a terrifying truth. Sometimes, danger isn't lurking in the shadows. It lives under your own roof. But beyond the shock and the heartbreak lies a question that has gripped the public, Hollywood, and now even the voice of Morgan Freeman himself. What drove Nick Reiner to allegedly commit such a violent act? And how could someone like Rob Reiner, a man so celebrated, so admired, be described by one of Hollywood's most iconic voices as depraved? These words from Freeman sent ripples through social media and entertainment news, igniting debates, speculation, and a morbid curiosity that no one could ignore. The phrase alone, "he was depraved," demands explanation, and it's the kind of statement that makes you pause, squint at the screen, and wonder what secrets were hidden behind the Reiner family's public facade. Let's rewind for a moment. Rob Reiner, 78, had spent decades in the public eye. He was a man whose career spanned decades of acting, directing, and producing some of the most beloved films in Hollywood history. From the unforgettable moments in This Is Spinal Tap to the tender, heartfelt storytelling in The Princess Bride, Reiner carved out a legacy that seemed untouchable. Michelle, 70, was his partner not just in life but in public perception, a woman who exuded warmth, stability, and elegance. Together, they represented the picture of a successful, loving Hollywood family. Their Brentwood estate, valued at $13.5 million, symbolized not just wealth but security, luxury, and a life carefully curated in the public eye. It was the kind of home where one assumed that danger was a distant concept, something that belonged to someone else, somewhere far away. But appearances, as we are painfully reminded, can be deceiving. The night of the murders, the first shockwave came not from the crime itself, but from the circumstances of its discovery. Romy, their daughter, stumbled upon the scene. Reports suggest she immediately identified the presence of a dangerous family member, who she warned authorities could be the suspect. The courage it must have taken to not only witness the aftermath, but also recognize the threat lurking within her own family is almost incomprehensible. And yet, it was Romy's intuition, her immediate assessment, that set the stage for the police investigation, her words planting the seed of a terrifying reality that was only just beginning to unfold. Nick Reiner, the son living in the guest house on the estate, was taken into custody that same night. It's hard to overstate the shock this arrest caused. Here was a young man, raised in privilege, educated, with every resource available, now facing charges that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. And the public, glued to every headline, struggled to reconcile the boy they might have seen growing up in family photos with the accused murderer depicted in news reports. The story has all the makings of a Hollywood thriller: wealth, fame, scandal, family betrayal. But it is real, it is tragic, and the emotional weight cannot be overstated. But what makes this story even more compelling and horrifying is the way the details slowly began to emerge, piece by piece, like fragments of a puzzle revealing a picture that no one wanted to see. Early reports from police and witnesses hinted at tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface, relationships frayed by secrets, and perhaps unspoken grievances that had never found their outlet. And then there is Morgan Freeman. Why Freeman? Why now? His public statement, describing Rob Reiner as depraved, carries a weight that transcends gossip or speculation. Freeman is known for his measured, calm voice, the kind that lends gravitas to documentaries and films alike. For him to make such a direct and damning statement suggests that what occurred within the Reiner household was not just shocking in its physical brutality, but also morally disturbing in a way that has only now been acknowledged publicly. As we explore this story, you'll notice a pattern. The contrasts are dizzying. Public success versus private turmoil, love versus betrayal, appearance versus reality. The Reiners embodied the American dream in many ways: wealth, acclaim, family. But beneath that veneer, a storm was quietly building. And while the media scrambled to cover the breaking news, and social media erupted with theories, questions, and outrage, the deeper, more unsettling truths were emerging slowly. Who could have predicted that such a serene, prestigious household would become the scene of one of the most shocking crimes in recent Hollywood memory? It's easy to become lost in the spectacle, the arrest, the headlines, the viral social media posts. But at the heart of this story is human tragedy. 2 lives ended violently. A daughter traumatized, a son accused of the unthinkable, and a public left to grapple with the notion that even the most seemingly perfect lives can harbor darkness. And yet, the narrative does not stop there. The intrigue is not solely in the act itself, but in the ripple effects, the whispers, the statements, the reputations that will forever be altered. Morgan Freeman's words have become a focal point because they suggest that there is more to this story than what meets the eye, that perhaps there were patterns of behavior or truths about Rob Reiner that were hidden, even from those who thought they knew him best. And now, as we prepare to dive deeper, it's important to ask, why does this story captivate us so? Is it the shocking nature of the crime? The betrayal of family bonds? The involvement of Hollywood royalty in a scandal that seems ripped from the pages of fiction? Or is it something more primal, a reminder that even in lives filled with privilege, fame, and outward success, darkness can fester quietly, unseen, until it explodes in ways that devastate everyone in its path? By the end of this video, you will have a clearer understanding of the Reiner family's history, the events leading up to that fateful night, the investigation, the public and private reactions, and the chilling words of Morgan Freeman that have set the internet ablaze. But be warned, this story is not for the faint of heart. It is raw, it is real, and it challenges our notions of trust, family, and the human capacity for violence. And while you may think you know what happened, the details we will uncover will surprise you again and again. So stay with us as we peel back the layers, revealing the tensions, secrets, and shocking revelations that lie beneath the Reiner family's public image. Ask yourself, could this happen to any family? And more importantly, what does it say about the people we think we know, the people we love, and the lives we admire from afar? But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Behind every perfect family photo, a secret. That phrase has become almost cliché in the world of true crime. Yet in the case of the Reiners, it couldn't ring more true. At first glance, Rob and Michelle Reiner's lives appeared to be the epitome of Hollywood success and familial bliss. Pictures of them attending glamorous events, smiling alongside friends and co-stars, projected a life of comfort, elegance, and unshakable harmony. Their Brentwood estate, a sprawling property worth $13.5 million, seemed like a sanctuary, a place where wealth and security promised protection from the world's chaos. But appearances, as we would learn in the most brutal way, were just that, appearances. Rob Reiner was 78 years old, yet he moved through life with the energy and charisma of a man decades younger. A towering presence in Hollywood, his career was legendary. From his early days on All in the Family to his iconic roles in films like This Is Spinal Tap, he had cultivated an image as both a talented actor and a serious director. His works, movies like The Princess Bride and A Few Good Men weren't just entertainment. They were cultural touchstones, stories that shaped generations. Michelle, his wife of many decades, was the anchor to Rob's towering public persona. She exuded warmth, intelligence, and grace. Together, they were a team that seemed untouchable, admired by Hollywood insiders and the public alike. But the very nature of perfection is fragile. Behind the smiles and social events, cracks had begun to form, small, almost imperceptible at first, but growing in intensity over the years. Friends would occasionally speak of subtle tensions, disagreements whispered behind closed doors, moments that never made it to Instagram or tabloids. Nick Reiner, the couple's only son living in the guest house on the estate, had a complicated relationship with his parents. Publicly, he seemed like a young man with access to privilege and opportunity, yet privately, there were undercurrents of resentment, frustration, and isolation. To the outside world, it was difficult to reconcile the family scene on red carpets and social gatherings with the strained dynamics that reportedly existed behind closed doors. Even Romy Reiner, their daughter, seemed caught in this tension. While she was the one who discovered the bodies, she had grown up navigating a household where appearances were prioritized over confrontation. In a family where public image mattered immensely, any sign of weakness, conflict, or vulnerability had been carefully masked. And yet, the reality of human emotion cannot be entirely suppressed. People may smile for the cameras, but inside, resentment, fear, or anger can fester quietly. It is in that gap between appearance and reality that tragedy often finds its path. The facade extended beyond just the family. Their home itself was a reflection of this cultivated image, a mansion that spoke of success and safety, with meticulously manicured gardens, state-of-the-art security, and an air of untouchable wealth. But no estate, no matter how grand, can shield a family from its own internal storms. As Romy and Nick grew up, the very walls meant to protect them may have instead contained pressures, expectations, and, according to some reports, hidden threats. Family members, even those who seem closest, can be the source of danger when underlying tensions go unresolved. In the case of the Reiners, those unresolved tensions would escalate to a level that few could have imagined. In exploring the Reiner family's public facade, it's essential to understand just how much effort went into crafting it. Every public appearance was calculated, every smile, every gesture, a reinforcement of an image of stability, success, and love. Hollywood thrives on storytelling, and the Reiners had become masters of the narrative that they wanted the world to see. But storytelling is double-edged. It can mask truth just as effectively as it can convey it. The very charm, wit, and charisma that Rob displayed on screen may have simultaneously concealed darker dynamics within his household, dynamics that now demand scrutiny in light of the events that unfolded. And yet, there were signs, tiny, often overlooked, that all was not as perfect as it seemed. Neighbors recalled unusual activity on the estate, hushed arguments that seemed out of place for a home so publicly serene. Friends mentioned moments of tension between family members, fleeting glimpses of disagreements that never escalated into public knowledge. Social media posts, carefully curated, suggested a life filled with harmony, yet the reality behind those posts may have been far more complex. In many ways, the Reiner story is a cautionary tale about the human tendency to prioritize appearance over authenticity and the devastating consequences that can arise when the two diverge too sharply. Nick's presence on the estate is a key part of this narrative. Living in the guest house, somewhat physically removed from the main household, he occupied a space that was both within and outside the family structure. He was close enough to be considered part of daily life, yet separate enough to exist in isolation. Some experts on family dynamics note that such physical separation can contribute to emotional distance, fostering feelings of neglect, resentment, or disconnection. It is within these gaps, these interstices of family life, that tragedy often germinates, unnoticed until it explodes in irreversible ways. The Reiners' social circle also played a role in maintaining this perfect facade. Friends and colleagues often spoke of the family with admiration, highlighting their generosity, social grace, and commitment to their respective careers. Yet few, if any, seemed aware of the tensions simmering behind closed doors. This discrepancy between public perception and private reality is a recurring theme in cases of family violence, particularly in households where wealth and social standing amplify the pressure to maintain appearances. The Reiners were no exception, their public image carefully shielded by charm, success, and influence. It is also worth considering the psychological toll of living under such scrutiny. When every action, every misstep, and every argument is potentially subject to public judgment, family members may suppress emotions, avoid confrontation, and internalize grievances. These unexpressed emotions do not disappear. They accumulate, creating pressure points that, over time, can become explosive. For Nick, Romy, and even their parents, the weight of expectation, combined with unresolved conflicts, may have created an environment ripe for tragedy. While no one can excuse the violence that occurred, understanding these underlying pressures is crucial for comprehending how a household that appeared perfect could produce such devastation. And so, the perfect facade of the Reiner family, so carefully constructed over decades, was not just a veneer. It was a mask, a protective layer concealing a complex and ultimately dangerous reality. As we move forward into the story of that fateful day, the investigation, and the shocking revelations from Morgan Freeman and others, it is essential to keep this contrast in mind, the difference between the life they projected and the life they lived. Because in the tension between perception and reality lies the key to understanding not only what happened, but why it was so shocking to the world. The stage is set. We have seen the outward perfection. The public smiles, the Hollywood parties, the meticulously maintained estate. But behind that perfect facade, tension, resentment, and perhaps even hidden malice simmered quietly. The day of the tragedy would expose the fragility of that perfection in a way that no one could have imagined, a violent rupture that would leave a family shattered and the world watching in disbelief. And as the next chapter begins, we will step into that fateful day. The morning that started like any other and ended in a horror that no one saw coming. The perfect facade had begun to crack, and what lay beneath would change everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A day like any other. That's how it began in the Reiner household. A day that, in hindsight, would forever be etched into history as the moment when a family's world fractured beyond repair. The morning of December 22nd dawned over Brentwood with the typical California clarity, soft sunlight cutting through the chill, birds quietly fluttering across the manicured lawns. For most neighbors, it was just another ordinary day in one of Los Angeles's most affluent neighborhoods. But behind the gates of the Reiner estate, something dark was already stirring, something that would erupt with a violence that no one could have predicted. Rob Reiner, 78, had likely begun his day with his usual routine, a mix of coffee, perhaps a light breakfast, and quiet reflection before stepping into the whirlwind of a household that was both his sanctuary and, as we now understand, a stage for tension. Michelle, 70, his wife, may have been preparing for the day in her own way, attending to details large and small, maintaining the image of normalcy that the family had perfected over decades. And Nick, their 32-year-old son, lived in the guest house, a separate but connected part of the estate. On paper, it was a peaceful arrangement, designed to provide independence while keeping the family close. But within those walls, unseen conflicts were simmering, and by the day's end, those tensions would explode in the most horrific way imaginable. It is difficult to overstate the shock that rippled through Brentwood and the wider public once news of the murders broke. Police reports reveal that the bodies of Rob and Michelle were discovered by their daughter, Romy, 27, a detail that adds a layer of chilling immediacy to the tragedy. Imagine stumbling upon such a scene, the lifeless forms of your parents before your eyes, and immediately recognizing that danger had come from within. Romy reportedly warned authorities that a dangerous family member should be considered a suspect, a statement that would guide investigators toward a horrifying possibility. That the person responsible was someone who had grown up under the same roof, someone whom the Reiners had trusted implicitly. The first few hours of the investigation were a blur of activity and disbelief. Officers swarmed the estate, forensic teams combed through the property, and neighbors were interviewed to piece together a timeline of the day's events. Every detail mattered. The movement of individuals around the property, interactions that might seem inconsequential, and the complex web of family dynamics that could offer clues to motive. But even at this early stage, the stark reality was undeniable. This was not a random act of violence. It was personal, it was intimate, and it was brutal. Nick Reiner was taken into custody that very night, charged with first-degree murder. The speed of the arrest shocked many, leaving the public struggling to reconcile the image of a privileged, seemingly well-adjusted young man with the alleged violence of the crime. Reports suggest that Nick had lived relatively quietly in the guest house, a life seemingly detached from the main household but inextricably linked to the family's daily rhythm. Questions immediately arose. What drove him to such a horrific act? Were there warning signs that friends, neighbors, or even his own family had missed? And why did Romy feel compelled to warn authorities about his potential danger before anything else? The morning of the murders, according to initial reconstructions, may have started with nothing out of the ordinary. But as the hours progressed, the tension within the estate intensified. Experts on family violence note that households with complex dynamics, especially where power, wealth, and expectation intersect, can harbor undercurrents of resentment and conflict that remain invisible to outsiders. The Reiner estate, with its manicured lawns and luxurious interior, was not immune to this psychological reality. Beneath the polished surfaces, conflicts may have been escalating silently, setting the stage for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. Neighbors later recounted hearing nothing unusual, which underscores the stealth with which the events of that day unfolded. There were no dramatic confrontations visible from the street, no cries that traveled beyond the estate's walls. This is often the case in family tragedies. The most violent acts occur where trust is highest, where the perpetrators believe themselves most hidden, and where the impact will be most profound. The public fascination with this case is partly rooted in this very paradox. A household that appeared idyllic, a family that seemed untouchable, destroyed from within. Romy's role in discovering the crime cannot be overstated. The emotional weight of that moment, the shock, the disbelief, the immediate need to act, was unimaginable. She not only faced the trauma of witnessing the aftermath of a violent act, but also bore the responsibility of guiding authorities toward the truth. Her statement about a dangerous family member demonstrated both courage and acute awareness of the dynamics within her family. It is an extraordinary moment of clarity amidst chaos, a detail that investigators would lean on heavily as they sought to reconstruct the events leading up to the tragedy. The forensic investigation revealed details that painted an even grimmer picture of the events. While the specific accounts of the crime scene are harrowing, reports indicate that the violence was sudden and lethal. Each piece of evidence, the placement of the bodies, the nature of the wounds, the absence of signs of forced entry, pointed investigators toward the conclusion that this was not an accident, nor the result of a stranger's intrusion. Rather, it was a crime rooted in the intimate dynamics of the household, carried out by someone with knowledge of the home, access to the victims, and, perhaps, a deeply personal motive. As the day progressed, the media began to cover the story, but the narrative remained incomplete. Headlines screamed the facts, but could not convey the full depth of the tragedy. 2 lives ended violently, a daughter traumatized, a son accused, and a community forced to reconcile the familiar with the horrifying. The public's curiosity, morbid and insatiable, was fueled not just by the act itself, but by the staggering contrast between the Reiner's public image and the private reality now revealed. Adding another layer of intrigue to the day's events was the response of Hollywood insiders. The Reiners were not just a family, they were icons. Rob Reiner's decades-long career had touched millions, his films beloved across generations. Michelle Reiner, though less publicly prominent, was a respected figure in her own right. The deaths sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry, prompting public statements from friends, colleagues, and, eventually, Morgan Freeman, whose words would ignite debate and speculation. Freeman's characterization of Rob as depraved was not part of the immediate aftermath but cast a long shadow over the events of that day, forcing the public to question what might have been hidden beneath the family's carefully curated image. The afternoon and evening of December 22nd were a flurry of investigative activity. Law enforcement worked tirelessly to secure the scene, interview family members and acquaintances, and begin the painstaking process of piecing together a timeline. Every action, every movement within the estate became a critical detail. The police had to consider the psychological state of Nick, the history of the family, and the testimony of Romy, all while managing the intense media scrutiny that surrounded a case involving high-profile individuals. Each revelation added to the mounting tension. The public learned not only of the violent act itself, but of the unsettling circumstances that suggested a deeper, more complicated narrative. By nightfall, Nick Reiner had been formally taken into custody, and the estate was cordoned off. Investigators had gathered preliminary evidence, but many questions remained unanswered. What exactly had led to this horrific confrontation? Were there warning signs that could have prevented it? And, perhaps most chillingly, how could a family that seemed perfect from the outside descend so completely into tragedy? These questions would linger in the public consciousness, driving speculation, discussion, and debate for months to come. The fatal day of December 22nd was not simply a timeline of events. It was the culmination of years of complex dynamics, tensions, and relationships that had quietly evolved behind the Reiners' polished facade. What began as an ordinary morning ended in a nightmare that would forever change the lives of those involved and captivate the world. The day's events underscore a harsh truth. Violence often comes from the places we least expect, and the people we trust most are sometimes capable of the unthinkable. And yet, even amidst the horror, the story was far from over. The events of that day set the stage for a chain reaction that would involve public outrage, legal battles, shocking revelations, and the haunting words of Morgan Freeman, whose voice lent an unexpected and chilling perspective on the life and character of Rob Reiner. What the public would soon learn was that the tragedy of December 22nd was not just a crime of opportunity or impulse, but the result of a complex web of familial, psychological, and social factors that demanded examination. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What drives a child to turn against the very people who brought them into the world? It's a question that has haunted psychologists, criminologists, and the public alike for decades. In the case of Nick Reiner, the question is particularly wrenching. How could a young man raised in privilege, surrounded by love, opportunity, and resources, allegedly commit the unthinkable, murder his own parents in their Brentwood estate? To understand Nick, to grasp even the faintest outlines of his motivations, we have to look beyond the headlines and public image and examine the complexities of his upbringing, personality, and the relationships within his family. Nick Reiner, 32 at the time of the tragedy, was the only son of Rob and Michelle Reiner. He lived in the guest house on the sprawling $13.5 million estate, a space that symbolized both connection and separation. Physically close to his parents, yet apart enough to develop a sense of independence, or perhaps isolation. Nick's living arrangement was a microcosm of the dynamics that would define his family life, proximity with underlying tension. Those who knew him described a young man who was both bright and complicated, possessing talents and traits that suggested promise, but also hints of a deeper emotional struggle. From an early age, Nick was exposed to the pressures of living in a high-profile family. Growing up as the child of a Hollywood icon meant navigating a world where appearances mattered as much as reality, where every public interaction was scrutinized, and where the weight of expectation could be crushing. Nick's parents were not merely caretakers. They were public figures whose reputations demanded perfection, not only in their own lives, but in the lives of their children. In households like this, subtle tensions can grow quietly, almost imperceptibly, until they explode in ways that are devastating and irrevocable. The media has speculated about Nick's personality and behavior in the years leading up to the tragedy. Some sources suggest he exhibited signs of rebellion and detachment, characteristics not uncommon among children raised under intense scrutiny and pressure. Others point to possible mental health challenges, which may have been exacerbated by the family's high expectations and complex dynamics. While we cannot definitively diagnose or explain his actions, Understanding these factors is crucial to contextualizing the alleged crime. It's a stark reminder that outward appearances, luxury, privilege, social standing, do not always reflect internal reality. Relationships within the Reiner household were reportedly fraught with tension, though much of it was hidden from public view. While Rob and Michelle presented a unified, loving front to the world, family insiders suggest that conflict simmered beneath the surface. Arguments may have been avoided or suppressed in the interest of maintaining the family's image, leaving resentment to build silently. In families with such dynamics, children can feel both suffocated by expectation and alienated by lack of authentic communication. It is within this pressure cooker environment that tragedy can take root. Nick's relationship with his sister, Romy, adds another layer of complexity. Romy's role as the discoverer of their parents' bodies positions her as both witness and key informant in the investigation, but it also highlights the diverging experiences of siblings within the same family. While Romy may have maintained closer communication with her parents, Nick's physical and emotional separation in the guest house may have contributed to feelings of isolation, frustration, or even resentment. Sibling dynamics, especially in families under the microscope of fame and wealth, can intensify emotions and exacerbate existing tensions, creating a volatile mix when coupled with other stressors. Understanding Nick also requires examining his social and professional life. Reports indicate that he lived a relatively quiet existence, one removed from the constant public engagement that characterized his parents' lives. He had access to opportunities that many would envy, yet the isolation and perhaps unfulfilled expectations of his family's shadow may have fostered internal conflict. How much of his alleged actions were influenced by psychological factors, how much by unresolved familial tension, and how much by personal grievances remains a matter of investigation. What is clear, however, is that the convergence of these factors created a scenario ripe for tragedy. Behavioral experts note that in families with high achievement and public visibility, children can experience immense pressure to meet expectations, often without the emotional tools or guidance to navigate the weight of those demands. When combined with perceived neglect, favoritism, or unacknowledged grievances, these pressures can lead to feelings of inadequacy, frustration, and in extreme cases, explosive anger. Nick's alleged actions cannot be understood in isolation. They are intertwined with the environment in which he was raised, the expectations placed upon him, and the dynamics of a household in which appearances were prioritized over emotional transparency. The events of December 22nd suggest that whatever tensions existed between Nick and his parents reached a breaking point. Reports indicate that the crime was sudden and violent, a stark contrast to the outward serenity of the Reiner estate. Investigators have focused on reconstructing the timeline, understanding interactions, and examining behavioral patterns that may have precipitated the tragedy. Each detail adds a layer of understanding but also deepens the sense of horror. This was not a random act. It was intimate, personal, and rooted in a family system that, despite its wealth and public image, was vulnerable to internal collapse. Nick's motivations, while central to the investigation, remain largely speculative in the public sphere. Some theories suggest a culmination of resentment, isolation, and perceived injustice within the family. Others point to psychological or emotional disturbances that may have impaired judgment. What is undeniable is that his alleged actions have permanently altered the lives of those closest to him, particularly Romy, who now carries the burden of not only discovering the crime, but also confronting the reality that the danger came from within her own family. The public reaction to Nick's arrest has been one of shock and disbelief. How could a young man from a family of influence, education, and opportunity be capable of such violence? The dissonance between public perception and alleged reality is staggering, fueling intense media coverage, social media speculation, and widespread debate. It is in this dissonance that much of the fascination with the case lies. A family that seemed perfect, a young man who appeared to have everything, and a violent act that challenges our understanding of human behavior, trust, and familial bonds. Nick's story, while central to the tragedy, also serves as a lens through which we can examine broader themes. The pressures of growing up in a high-profile family, the complexities of parent-child relationships, and the hidden vulnerabilities that exist behind even the most polished facades. It forces uncomfortable questions about responsibility, both personal and systemic. Could the tragedy have been prevented? Were there warning signs that went unheeded? And how do we reconcile the actions of a son with the image of the parents we thought we knew? As we continue to unfold this story, Nick's presence looms large, not just as the accused, but as a symbol of the hidden fractures within families that seem, on the surface, unbreakable. His actions, whether motivated by emotion, grievance, or deeper psychological factors, are inseparable from the household dynamics, the pressures of fame, and the complex relationships that define the Reiner family. Understanding Nick is not about excusing the violence, but about grasping the human factors that contribute to such an incomprehensible event. And as we move to the next chapter, we will explore Romy Reiner's perspective, the daughter who discovered the aftermath, the witness to tragedy, and the voice that first sounded the alarm about a dangerous family member. Her story adds depth, emotional resonance, and critical context to the events of that fatal day. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She found them, and immediately knew something was wrong. That statement, simple on its surface, barely scratches the depth of what Romy Reiner experienced that day. At just 27, she faced a scene that no one should ever have to witness: the lifeless bodies of her parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, in their own home. The emotional weight of that moment is almost impossible to convey. Shock, disbelief, horror, and the immediate, instinctive recognition that someone she knew and trusted was responsible all collided in an instant, creating a trauma that would resonate for the rest of her life. Romy's discovery came on the morning of December 22nd, a day that began unremarkably but ended with a tragedy that would shock the world. According to reports, she was the first to enter the main house, a daughter accustomed to the rhythms of her family and the normalcy of her daily life within the estate. But nothing was normal now. The scene before her was chaotic yet eerily silent, a stillness that only tragedy can create. Every instinct told her that danger had come from inside the family. Not a burglar, not an outsider, but someone she had grown up with, someone intimately connected to the lives that were now violently interrupted. Her immediate reaction was both brave and tragic. Romy reportedly told authorities about a dangerous family member who should be considered a suspect. That phrase alone is extraordinary, not only for its foresight, but for the clarity with which a young woman under immense emotional stress assessed the situation. Most people, when confronted with such a scene, would be paralyzed by shock, unable to articulate the most basic details. Romy, however, combined acute observation with instinctive understanding of her family dynamics, offering the police a critical piece of insight that would guide the investigation from the very beginning. Consider for a moment the courage it takes to identify a family member as dangerous, particularly in a household that has long presented an image of stability and warmth. Many people struggle for decades to acknowledge the destructive behaviors of their loved ones. For Romy, the realization came in an instant, forcing her to navigate not only grief, but also the urgent need for action. Her statement to authorities was not just a factual report. It was a moral imperative, a recognition that the safety of others depended on acknowledging a terrifying truth that many would have preferred to ignore. Romy's perspective sheds light on a central theme of this tragedy: the hidden dangers within families. Outward appearances, the smiles, the celebrations, the carefully curated social media posts, often mask the tensions, resentments, and conflicts that simmer quietly behind closed doors. In the Reiner household, these tensions may have been subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders, but for those living within the environment, they were real, tangible, and, ultimately, lethal. Romy's awareness of these dynamics, her ability to perceive the danger, highlights not only her bravery, but also the depth of dysfunction that had been allowed to persist unchecked. The immediate aftermath of her discovery was a blur of emotions and activity. Romy had to navigate the shock of loss while simultaneously interacting with law enforcement, providing statements, and helping establish a timeline for the events that had just occurred. This duality, personal trauma combined with the responsibility of aiding an investigation, is almost unimaginable in its weight. It's a testament to her resilience that she was able to perform this role effectively, even as she grappled with the horror of her parents' deaths and the implications of her own family's involvement. One of the most unsettling aspects of Romy's revelation is the way it reframes our understanding of Nick Reiner's alleged actions. Her identification of him, or at least the suggestion that a family member posed danger, provides an immediate connection between motive, opportunity, and familial tension. It's a rare glimpse into the private mechanics of a family that, until that moment, had presented itself as cohesive and harmonious. Romy's insight forces investigators, and the public, to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the most severe threats come from those we trust most. Psychologists studying familial violence often note that siblings can play a critical role in understanding the dynamics of abuse, aggression, and conflict within a household. Romy's perspective is invaluable, not only for its factual content, but for the emotional intelligence it demonstrates. She was able to recognize patterns of behavior, assess risk, and communicate critical information to authorities, all while processing a trauma that would leave scars for years to come. Her role in the investigation underscores the importance of observation, intuition, and courage in situations where conventional indicators of danger may be absent. As the day unfolded, Romy's revelation became a cornerstone of the investigation. Law enforcement began to focus more closely on Nick, examining his movements, interactions, and potential motives. Each piece of evidence collected was filtered through the lens of her statement, lending investigators a framework within which to interpret the chaos they encountered. Her courage effectively shifted the trajectory of the investigation, highlighting how critical insider knowledge can be in cases of domestic violence and familial homicide. But Romy's experience is also a lens into the broader emotional reality of this tragedy. Beyond the investigation and the legal ramifications lies the human cost. A daughter forced to witness her parents' deaths, a family fractured irreparably, and the psychological impact of living in a household where trust, once assumed to be unconditional, had been shattered. Her revelation is not merely a procedural detail. It is the emotional core of the story, the point at which private grief intersects with public tragedy. The narrative of the Reiner family, when viewed through Romy's eyes, is one of complexity, subtlety, and, ultimately, horror. It challenges our assumptions about wealth, stability, and familial bonds, reminding us that appearances can be misleading and that danger can reside in the most familiar places. Romy's insight offers both clarity and a chilling sense of inevitability. She recognized the threat, but the structures around her, family dynamics, emotional suppression, and perhaps a lack of intervention, allowed it to escalate to a fatal conclusion. Moreover, Romy's role raises profound questions about the nature of perception and responsibility within families. How do we identify danger? When do we act on intuition? And what are the consequences when warnings go unheeded? In this case, her immediate assessment and communication with authorities were pivotal, yet they also underscore the limitations of even the most perceptive individuals when faced with the complexity of human behavior and the intensity of familial emotions. As the investigation deepened, Romy's revelation continued to resonate. It informed police strategy, guided forensic analysis, and helped establish the connections between motive, opportunity, and the alleged perpetrator. But perhaps more importantly, it offered a human perspective on the tragedy, a reminder that behind every news report, every headline, and every public statement, there are individuals processing grief, shock, and betrayal. Romy's experience is emblematic of the dual realities faced by those who survive domestic tragedies: the need to navigate personal trauma while also engaging with external systems of justice, media, and public scrutiny. By the end of that day, the implications of Romy's revelation were clear. The danger had come from within. The investigation would continue, but the first critical insight had been provided. Her courage, clarity, and emotional intelligence allowed authorities to focus their efforts, and in doing so, helped prevent further obfuscation of the truth. It is a sobering reminder that sometimes, the most significant acts of bravery occur not in the glare of public attention, but in the quiet, painful moments when one must confront reality head-on. And as the story continues, we will delve deeper into the nature of the crime itself, the brutality, the forensic details, and the evidence that began to illuminate what exactly happened that day. Romy's revelation was the spark, but the flames of the full story were only beginning to spread. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Stabbed in their own home. No one saw it coming. Those words alone capture the chilling reality of what occurred within the Reiner estate on that fateful December day. Violence of this magnitude, inflicted upon one's own parents, is rare, shocking, and incomprehensible. And yet, the evidence collected by authorities paints a stark picture of the horrific events that unfolded, a tableau of personal betrayal, intimate knowledge, and lethal intent that shattered not only a family but a community. The forensic details from the scene reveal a level of precision and suddenness that underscores the deeply personal nature of the crime. Rob and Michelle Reiner were found in the main residence, victims of multiple stab wounds, the severity of which indicated a determined, deliberate attack. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence suggesting a break-in or robbery gone wrong. Everything about the scene pointed to an assailant who had intimate knowledge of the property, the family's routines, and the vulnerabilities of the victims. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a calculated, devastatingly intimate act that came from within the circle of trust. The location of the bodies, the nature of the injuries, and the state of the household provided investigators with critical insights into both the perpetrator's mindset and the circumstances leading up to the crime. The absence of defensive wounds in certain instances suggested either a sudden ambush or incapacitation, while other evidence indicated that there had been some level of confrontation. The forensic reconstruction of the events is harrowing. It suggests a sequence in which the violence escalated rapidly, leaving little opportunity for escape or intervention. The intimacy of the crime, the fact that the victims were killed within their own home by someone who had lived under the same roof, adds a psychological weight to the physical brutality. Authorities also noted subtle signs that point to premeditation. The layout of the estate, including Nick Reiner's residence in the guest house, provided him with both access and opportunity. Experts on criminal behavior often observe that familial homicides, particularly those involving adult children, frequently involve meticulous planning, born out of deep-seated emotions and prolonged tension. In this case, the convergence of proximity, motive, and opportunity created a scenario in which the violence could unfold with devastating efficiency. While no motive can excuse such actions, understanding the dynamics that allowed the act to occur provides crucial insight into the psychology behind the crime. The emotional impact on the investigators and first responders cannot be overstated. Law enforcement professionals, trained to handle scenes of violence, often describe familial homicides as particularly disturbing due to the intimate nature of the act. Witnessing the aftermath of such a crime, where trust, love, and family bonds have been violently severed, leaves an indelible mark. For the officers who arrived on the Reiner estate, the scene combined the shock of sudden, brutal violence with the complexity of high-profile social status, intensifying both the professional and emotional challenges of the investigation. Beyond the physical evidence, the crime itself carries symbolic weight. The Reiners, prominent figures in Hollywood, represented stability, success, and the idealized American family. Their deaths, carried out by someone within that family unit, shattered these illusions and forced the public to confront the uncomfortable reality that no wealth, fame, or outward perfection can shield individuals from internal dysfunction or violence. The brutality of the crime is magnified not only by the act itself, but by its context. The setting, the relationships, and the expectations that had been carefully curated over decades. The media coverage of the crime focused heavily on these elements: the shock value, the notoriety of the family, and the gruesome nature of the act. But while headlines grabbed attention, they could not capture the full depth of the tragedy, the loss of life, the psychological trauma inflicted on Romy, and the emotional fallout for friends, colleagues, and the broader community. Understanding the brutality of the crime requires more than sensationalism. It demands a recognition of the profound rupture in family and community, the shattering of trust, and the violent intrusion of fear into a space previously considered safe. Psychologists and criminologists examining the case have noted that familial homicides, particularly those involving adult children, often involve complex motivations. Resentment, perceived injustice, psychological disturbances, and long-standing relational tension. While we cannot definitively know Nick Reiner's inner thought processes, the patterns observed in similar cases offer a framework for understanding the interplay of emotional and situational factors that may lead to such an outcome. In many ways, this crime reflects the culmination of years of tension, unspoken grievances, and psychological strain that had gone unaddressed, manifesting in an act of irreversible violence. The forensic evidence, coupled with witness testimony and Romy's statements, has allowed investigators to piece together a tentative timeline. While some details remain confidential due to the ongoing legal proceedings, the public record suggests a sequence in which the attack occurred swiftly, leaving little chance for intervention. The fact that the perpetrator was a family member introduced an additional layer of horror and complexity. The crime was not only against two individuals, but against the very concept of familial safety and trust. In this sense, the brutality of the act is both physical and psychological, extending far beyond the immediate victims to touch everyone connected to the Reiners. Understanding the nature of the injuries and the crime scene also provides insight into the emotional intensity behind the act. Multiple stab wounds, targeted attacks, and the rapid progression of violence suggest a level of anger, frustration, or rage that cannot be fully quantified. Forensic experts often note that the severity and pattern of injuries can indicate the emotional state of the perpetrator, providing clues about the motivations and psychological factors at play. In this case, the evidence points to a combination of personal grievance, opportunity, and perhaps a sense of pent-up emotion that erupted with catastrophic consequences. But the crime was not only about the act itself, it was about its implications. The intimate knowledge required to carry out the killings, the timing, and the choice of location all speak to a breach of trust so profound that it reverberates beyond the immediate family. The Reiners' home, a symbol of security and privilege, became a site of horror, challenging assumptions about safety, love, and the nature of familial bonds. For those following the case, the brutality of the crime is inseparable from the context in which it occurred. The juxtaposition of wealth and violence, love and betrayal, appearance and reality. The Reiner case also highlights the difficulty of reconciling public persona with private behavior. Rob Reiner, celebrated for decades in Hollywood, and Michelle, admired for her partnership and poise, had built lives that suggested stability and care. Yet the crime exposes the limitations of perception. Wealth, status, and charm cannot obscure the hidden fractures in human relationships. The brutality of the murder forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of trust, the boundaries of familial loyalty, and the ways in which hidden tensions can escalate to irreversible violence. As investigators continued to analyze the crime scene, forensic reports and evidence collection became central to building a case against Nick Reiner. Every detail, from the layout of the house to the sequence of injuries, offered insight into the circumstances and planning involved. While much of the technical information remains confidential, the overarching narrative is clear. This was a deeply personal, violent act carried out in a controlled environment by someone intimately familiar with the victims. The brutality, precision, and intimacy of the crime set the stage for a legal and public reckoning that would captivate the nation. The aftermath of the crime is a stark reminder of the human cost of such violence. Beyond Rob and Michelle's deaths, the emotional trauma inflicted on Romy and other family members is profound. The psychological impact of discovering loved ones murdered by a family member cannot be overstated, nor can the ripple effects on friends, colleagues, and the wider community. It is within this intersection of personal horror and public scrutiny that the Reiner case takes on a uniquely unsettling dimension. And yet, the story is far from over. The brutality of the crime sets the emotional and investigative stage, but as we will see, the reactions from Hollywood, the media, and even Morgan Freeman himself introduce new layers of complexity. Freeman's public statement, calling Rob Reiner depraved, adds a shocking perspective to a story already steeped in horror, forcing us to question not only the act itself but the man behind the public image. Understanding the full impact of this tragedy requires moving beyond the physical evidence to examine character, history, and perception, dimensions that continue to unfold in the aftermath. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The news broke like a seismic tremor through Hollywood, sending ripples that reached every corner of the entertainment industry. Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner, found brutally murdered in their Brentwood estate, were not just any couple. They were Hollywood royalty, figures whose careers, reputations, and public personas had shaped the culture of film for decades. The idea that their deaths were allegedly at the hands of their own son was almost too shocking for the public to process. But the Hollywood community, accustomed to drama on and off screen, reacted with a mixture of disbelief, grief, and grim fascination, realizing that some stories, even for the most seasoned industry insiders, transcend fiction. Rob Reiner's career alone was monumental. From his early acting in All in the Family to directing iconic films like This Is Spinal Tap and The Princess Bride, his work had left an indelible mark on American culture. Celebrities, collaborators, and even casual moviegoers had admired him for decades. Michelle, though less public in her career, was equally respected in Hollywood circles for her grace, poise, and partnership with Rob. Their combined image projected a life of success, love, and stability, a life that now lay in ruins. The juxtaposition of this outward perfection against the violence of their deaths created a narrative so extreme that it dominated every conversation, every news cycle, and every social media feed. Immediate reactions poured in from industry insiders. Friends and collaborators expressed shock and sorrow, posting tributes, personal memories, and statements of disbelief. Directors, actors, and producers who had worked closely with Rob reflected publicly on his creativity, humor, and mentorship. Yet beneath these tributes lurked a tension, the acknowledgement that the murders were allegedly committed by their son, Nick, injected a moral complexity into grief. How do you mourn the loss of two beloved figures while simultaneously processing the horrifying actions of their child? Hollywood, usually adept at separating public and private personas, was forced to confront this unsettling intersection. Morgan Freeman's involvement, though initially peripheral, would soon become central to the narrative. Known for his authoritative, calm, and trustworthy presence, Freeman rarely wades into scandal, yet his public statement about Rob Reiner being depraved ignited a firestorm. The words carried enormous weight precisely because Freeman is considered a moral voice in Hollywood and beyond. For him to make such a statement suggested that the story had layers deeper than the crime itself, hinting at hidden truths that were only now being acknowledged publicly. Freeman's declaration instantly became a viral talking point, fueling debate, speculation, and outrage across social media platforms, talk shows, and news outlets. The Hollywood reaction was not uniform. Some defended the Reiners' public persona, arguing that whatever private flaws existed, they did not diminish the couple's legacy or contributions to the industry. Others, influenced by Freeman's statement, began to question the nature of Rob Reiner's character behind the scenes. These contrasting narratives created a tense environment where gossip, speculation, and professional reflection collided. It was a rare moment in Hollywood. A tragedy so intimate and shocking that it disrupted the usual rhythms of celebrity culture, forcing even the most seasoned insiders to pause and reevaluate their assumptions about family, trust, and public image. Media outlets scrambled to cover the story with both urgency and accuracy, balancing the sensational aspects of the crime with the need for factual reporting. Every angle was explored. The forensic details of the murders, Nick Reiner's alleged involvement, Romy's discovery of the bodies, and the potential motivations that had driven the events of December 22nd. Hollywood's fascination with drama, secrecy, and betrayal was met with reality, a collision that amplified the public's morbid curiosity. Talk shows, podcasts, and entertainment news programs dedicated extensive coverage to analyzing every known fact, often drawing on historical knowledge of the Reiners' careers and relationships to contextualize the tragedy. The ripple effect extended beyond personal grief and public speculation. Studios, production companies, and collaborators who had ongoing projects with Rob Reiner faced logistical and emotional consequences. Planned appearances, film productions, and public events were disrupted, replaced by statements of condolence and the grim task of processing loss while managing professional obligations. Hollywood's infrastructure, designed to navigate the ebbs and flows of celebrity life, was now forced to contend with a tragedy that was both deeply personal and highly public, illustrating the complex ways in which private violence can reverberate through an entire industry. Social media magnified the shockwaves exponentially. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became arenas for public grief, speculation, and debate. Hashtags trended, theories proliferated, and every statement, especially Freeman's, was dissected, debated, and amplified. The speed of information dissemination created both clarity and confusion. While facts were slowly emerging through official channels, rumors and interpretations filled the void, painting a vivid, sometimes distorted, picture of the tragedy. Hollywood insiders, journalists, and the general public all navigated this new reality simultaneously, with every post and statement contributing to a growing narrative that blended truth, speculation, and emotional reaction. At the same time, the story forced a reckoning with Hollywood's history of private versus public behavior.